The crimson wine cascaded down Daniel Chen's worn jacket in slow motion, droplets splattering across the marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel's executive lounge. And in that moment, as laughter erupted around him, and a man in a $3,000 suit sneered down at him, nobody in that room knew they had just humiliated the one person who could destroy the most important deal of their lives with a single phone call. Daniel stood perfectly still, his salt and pepper hair dripping with Cabernet, his weathered hands that had coded the algorithms that would change cloud computing forever. Hands that had held his dying wife just 18 months ago clenched, not in anger, but in the practiced restraint of a man who had learned that character reveals itself most clearly in moments of crisis. And as he slowly wiped his face with a paper napkin handed to him by a concerned janitor, his mind drifted back to that hospital room where Elizabeth had gripped those same hands with the last of her strength and made him promise something that everyone thought was crazy. "Danny," she had whispered, her voice barely audible over the steady beep of machines, her once vibrant eyes dimmed by the cancer that had ravaged her body for 2 brutal years. "Promise me you won't let success change who you are. Promise me you'll remember where we came from. That tiny apartment where we ate ramen and dreamed of changing the world. Promise me you'll stay close to real people, not just boardrooms and private jets." He had promised through tears, not knowing that this promise would lead him to this exact moment, standing in designer hotel lobby with wine soaking through to his skin, while Marcus Webb, VP of Strategic Partnerships at Hyperion Industries, the company about to sign an $800 million infrastructure deal with Chen Technologies, threw his head back and laughed. "Jesus Christ, watch where you're going, old man," Marcus had said when Daniel accidentally bumped into him while trying to find the conference room, his expensive drink sloshing, and when some had spilled, Marcus had simply poured the rest on Daniel's head deliberately, performing for his colleagues, who circled like sharks, sensing blood in the water. That's what happens when the hotel lets just anyone walk through the executive floor, probably some tourist who got lost looking for the budget rooms his entourage had left. Executives in matching power suits, their faces a blur of entitlement and cruelty. But Daniel noticed one woman didn't join in, a younger woman with Marcus's same sharp cheekbones but softer eyes, who looked away uncomfortably and whispered, "Marcus, that's enough." This was Sarah Webb, Marcus's younger sister, and though she worked in marketing for the same company, she had retained something her brother had lost in his climb up the corporate ladder: basic human decency. Daniel had chosen to attend this deal, signing in person but incognito for a reason that most CEOs would never understand. He needed to see the character of the people his company would be partnering with, not the polished presentations and rehearsed pitches they showed in boardrooms, but who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. His assistant James had argued against it for 2 hours. "Mr. Chen, this is insane. You're the founder and CEO of a $50 billion company. You have a responsibility to..." But Daniel had cut him off gently. "I have a responsibility to Elizabeth's memory. And I have a responsibility to make sure we partner with people who share our values. And the only way to know that is to see them when their masks are off." So he had left his tailored Tom Ford suits in the penthouse, put on the same type of clothes he wore when he first started Chen Technologies in a garage 20 years ago: simple khakis, a modest jacket, scuffed shoes, and walked into the Grand Meridian, looking like someone's uncle who had wandered in from a community college teaching job. And the results had been immediately illuminating. The valets had ignored him, the concierge had eyed him suspiciously, and now Marcus Webb had literally poured wine on him. And Daniel felt a strange calm settle over him, because this moment confirmed everything he needed to know. "Here, sir, let me help you." The janitor said his name tag read Tom, 27 years service, and he handed Daniel several napkins while shooting a disapproving look at Marcus's group. "Don't mind them. Some people forget their manners when they think they're important." Daniel smiled at Tom, a genuine smile that transformed his tired face. "Thank you, Tom. That's very kind. And you're right. Real importance is measured in how we treat people, not how much money we have in the bank." Tom nodded approvingly and helped Daniel wipe off his jacket, and in that small act of kindness, Daniel saw more character than in the entire group of executives who were now walking away, already forgetting the incident, headed toward conference room A, where, in exactly 30 minutes, they believed they would be signing the deal that would triple their company's valuation and secure Marcus's promotion to senior VP. Sarah lingered behind, approaching Daniel with an expression of genuine concern. "I'm so sorry about my brother. He's been under a lot of pressure with this deal. But that's no excuse, Can. I pay for your dry cleaning," or Daniel waved her off gently. "No need, really. I've survived worse than wine stains. But I appreciate your kindness. It speaks well of you." Sarah studied his face for a moment, something in his eyes making her pause, a depth and intelligence that didn't match his humble appearance. "Are you here for the Chen Technologies deal signing?" she asked carefully. In a manner of speaking, Daniel replied with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I have a vested interest in how things turn out." She nodded, still curious but too polite to press further. "Well, I hope the rest of your day is better than this again. I'm truly sorry." As she walked away to join her brother's group, Daniel made his way to the men's room to clean up properly. And while standing at the sink, watching wine-stained water swirl down the drain, he saw Elizabeth's reflection in his memory, standing behind him like she used to when he'd come home defeated from another investor meeting that went nowhere. Another door slammed in his face. You know what separates people who change the world from people who just take up space? She had asked him one night when he was ready to give up, when the rejections and failures seemed endless. World changers see setbacks as information, not insults. They stay humble enough to learn and strong enough to keep going. She had been his moral compass, his reminder that success without character is just decorated failure. And after she died, after the funeral, where hundreds of employees wept for a woman who had remembered all their names and asked about their children, Daniel had made a decision that baffled his board of directors. He would lead differently, live differently, measure success differently. He sold the mansion, donated half his personal wealth to cancer research, moved into a modest apartment, and started showing up to board meetings asking not just will this make money, but will this make things better? Some board members resigned, calling him naive, but the ones who stayed helped Chen Technologies become not just profitable, but purposeful. And their company culture of integrity and innovation attracted the best talent in the industry. And now they were on the verge of the biggest infrastructure deal in their history, partnering with Hyperion Industries to bring cutting-edge cloud solutions to 17 countries. And everything hinged on what would happen in conference room A in 23 minutes. Daniel dried his face, straightened his damp jacket, and instead of going to the conference room, he took the service elevator down to the hotel kitchen, where he had arranged to wait until the precise right moment. James was there, pacing nervously, his tablet clutched like a lifeline. "Mr. Chen, thank God I heard what happened. We can still call this off." "We can." Daniel put a hand on his shoulder. "Breathe, James. Everything is unfolding exactly as it needs to. Trust the process." James looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Sir, with respect. Marcus Webb just assaulted you. We have grounds to terminate negotiations immediately." But Daniel shook his head slowly. Marcus Webb revealed his character, which is valuable information. But his sister showed kindness, and Tom the janitor showed dignity. And before I make any decisions, I want to see how this plays out. I want to see if there's any remorse, any self-reflection, any growth possible. Upstairs in conference room A, Marcus Webb was holding court, riding high on adrenaline and arrogance, telling the story of the random old guy he'd put in his place to the other Hyperion executives who had flown in for the signing, You should have seen his face, absolutely priceless, standing there dripping wine like a drowned rat. He laughed, while Sarah sat quietly in the corner, her discomfort growing with each retelling, and she finally spoke up. Marcus, maybe we should focus on the deal. The Chen Technologies representatives will be here any minute, and we need to be professional. Marcus waved her off dismissively. Relax, Sarah. This is the biggest deal they've ever seen. They need us as much as we need them. Besides, I've heard their CEO is some reclusive weirdo who never shows up to anything. Sends underlings to do everything, probably some socially awkward programmer who got lucky. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them except Sarah suspected because she had done her research, was that Daniel Chen was neither lucky nor socially awkward, but a former foster kid who had taught himself to code in public libraries, who had worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, who had built his first successful app to help low-income families find resources, who had met Elizabeth at a homeless shelter where they both volunteered, and who had promised her, as she lay dying, that he would never forget that their success was a responsibility, not a trophy. At exactly 2 p.m., the conference room doors opened, and James walked in alone, his expression professionally neutral, carrying a leather portfolio, and Marcus stood immediately, his smile practiced and perfect, all traces of cruelty hidden behind a mask of corporate charm. James Rodriguez, Chen Technologies Executive Assistant. Great to finally meet in person. Mr. Chen joining us today, or? James set down the portfolio with a soft thud that somehow commanded silence. Mr. Chen is in the building, yes, and he wanted me to ask you a few questions before we proceed with the signing. Marcus's smile tightened slightly. Questions? I thought we had finalized everything. The contracts have been reviewed. The terms are agreed upon. James opened the portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Mr. Chen has a policy of evaluating not just the financial aspects of partnerships, but the cultural and ethical alignment. He believes that how we treat people reveals everything about whether a partnership will thrive or become toxic. The room went very quiet. A subtle shift in energy that made Sarah sit up straighter, a warning bell chiming somewhere in her instincts. Marcus forced a laugh. Of course, Chen. Technology's commitment to ethics is well known. That's why we're such a perfect match. Hyperion Industries prides itself on integrity and... James held up a hand. Then you won't mind answering this. How did you spend the 30 minutes before this meeting? Marcus blinked, thrown by the unexpected question. I'm sorry? What? James repeated calmly. The 30 minutes before this meeting. How did you conduct yourself? Who did you interact with? How did you treat them? Marcus exchanged glances with his colleagues, confusion mixing with the first tendrils of concern. We were in the lobby, networking, having a drink. I don't understand what this has to. The conference room door opened again, and Daniel Chen walked in, still wearing his wine-stained jacket, his hair still slightly damp, and the room erupted into chaos. Marcus's face went through a remarkable transformation. Recognition, horror, disbelief, on the span of 3 seconds, while his colleagues froze like statues, and Sarah closed her eyes, understanding flooding through her with the force of a tidal wave. Mr. Webb, Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of disappointed expectation rather than anger. You were about to tell James how you spent the last 30 minutes. Please continue. The color drained from Marcus's face, and he actually stumbled backward, gripping the conference table for support. Mr. Chen, I didn't. I had no idea. Daniel walked slowly to the head of the table, and despite his modest clothes and wine-stained appearance, he commanded the room with the presence of someone who had earned authority through competence and character rather than simply claimed it through position. No, you didn't know who I was, and that's precisely the point. You didn't know if I was someone important, so you treated me as less than human. You found it entertaining to humiliate someone you perceived as beneath you. Now you're afraid, not because you've realized what you did was wrong, but because you've realized there might be consequences. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and finally managed, "Sir, I am so incredibly sorry, was having a bad day. The stress of this deal, it was completely out of character for me." But Daniel raised a hand, and the excuse died in Marcus's throat. "Was it out of character, though?" Daniel asked, not unkindly, but with the precision of a surgeon touching a scalpel to infection. "Because in my experience, how we treat people when we think there's no benefit or consequence is exactly our character. It's not the exception, it's the truth." Sarah stood slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, despite the tears in her eyes. "Mr. Chen, my brother was wrong, inexcusably wrong, but please don't let his actions destroy this deal for everyone else at Hyperion. Hundreds of people have worked on this for 18 months, people who weren't in that lobby, people who don't deserve to." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he recognized. Someone caught between loyalty and integrity. Someone trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. "Your Sarah Weibo tried to stop him. And you apologized to me afterward. You didn't know who I was either. But you treated me with kindness anyway." She nodded, unable to speak. And Daniel felt Elizabeth's presence so strongly in that moment that he almost turned around to look for her. This was the choice she had always challenged him with: justice or mercy, accountability or grace, and the truth was that real leadership required both. "Here's what's going to happen," Daniel said, addressing the entire room. "This deal represents $800 million and the potential to bring critical infrastructure to communities that desperately need it. Thousands of people will benefit from this partnership, and I will not let one man's cruelty destroy that. However, I will not partner with a company that rewards behavior like what I experienced today." He turned to Marcus, who looked like he might be sick. "Mr. Webb, you have a choice. You can resign from this deal and from any leadership position involving Chen Technologies partnerships, or I walk out of this room right now and this contract dies. And before you answer, understand that I'm not doing this to punish you, but to protect every person who will have to work with you. Every person who might not have the power to defend themselves when you decide they're beneath your consideration." The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing, and Sarah watched her brother's face cycle through anger, denial, bargaining, and finally something that might have been the beginning of genuine support. "I'll resign from the deal," Marcus said finally, his voice hollow. "But Mr. Chen, for what it's worth, I truly am sorry, not just because of who you are, but because you're right. The way I treated you was wrong, and it wasn't the first time I've done something like that. And I don't know when I became this person, but I don't want to be him anymore." Daniel studied him for a long moment, and later James would say that this was the moment he truly understood why Elizabeth had loved this man, why employees would walk through fire for him, because instead of savoring Marcus's humiliation or delivering a crushing final blow, Daniel did something unexpected. He showed him a path forward. "Mr. Webb, the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes. We all do. It's whether they can recognize them, learn from them, and become better. You can't undo what you did, but you can decide what kind of person you'll be tomorrow, and the day after that, and the year after that." Daniel turned to the rest of the Hyperion team. "Sarah Webb will take over as primary liaison for this partnership, with full authority to negotiate terms. I trust that won't be a problem." The Hyperion CEO, who had been silent until now, stood and extended his hand. "No problem at all. Mr. Chenand, please accept my personal apology for today's incident. I assure you it does not reflect Hyperion's values." The deal was signed 2 hours later, with Sarah's hands shaking slightly as she put pen to paper, and as the room erupted in relieved applause and champagne was poured, Daniel slipped out quietly, taking the service elevator back down to the kitchen, where Tom the janitor was ending his shift. "Tom," Daniel called out, and the older man turned, surprised to see the wine-stained stranger again. "I wanted to thank you for your kindness today. You didn't have to help me, but you did, and it mattered." Tom smiled and waved it off. "Like I said, some people forget their manners. Glad your day got better." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a Chen Technologies business card, his personal card, the one he gave to maybe 5 people a year. "I'm looking for someone to head up our new community outreach division, someone who understands that real service isn't about titles, but about character. It would mean a significant raise and full benefits. And if you're interested, I'd like you to call this number." Tom looked at the card, looked at Daniel, looked back at the card, and his eyes widened as he read the name. You're Daniel Chun Yu-on." Daniel smiled. "I built a company, yes. But people like you who show dignity and kindness in everyday moments, you're the ones who keep the world decent. Call me if you're interested." He left Tom standing there, card in hand, tears in his eyes, and made his way out of the hotel into the afternoon sunlight. And for the first time since Elizabeth died, Daniel felt something close to peace. Because he had kept his promise to her. He had stayed close to real people. He had let character rather than profit guide his decisions, and he had chosen grace over revenge. 6 months later, Sarah Webb would send him a message saying that Marcus had enrolled in therapy and volunteered at a youth center on weekends, trying to become someone he could respect in the mirror. And while Daniel knew that one humiliation didn't guarantee transformation, he also knew that sometimes people needed to hit bottom to find the courage to climb upward. Tom did call, and he did take the job, and his community outreach division would go on to create programs that helped hundreds of young people from backgrounds like Daniel's find their way into technology careers. The story of what happened in the Grand Meridian Hotel leaked. Eventually, these things always do. And it spread across social media with the speed of wildfire. And people debated whether Daniel had been too harsh or too soft, whether Marcus deserved a second chance or should have been destroyed. But Daniel stayed off social media and instead visited Elizabeth's grave every Sunday, where he would sit and tell her about his week. And that Sunday, he told her, "I kept my promise. Lee So-won poured wine on my head, and instead of using my power to crush him, I used it to teach him, and maybe that matters. Maybe that's how we actually change things, one choice at a time, one moment of grace at a time." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and Daniel chose to believe it was her way of saying she was proud. And as he drove home to his modest apartment, past the mansions he could easily afford but chose not to buy, past the private clubs he could join but never would, he thought about how success had taught him less than failure, how power had taught him less than powerlessness, and how the best parts of himself had been shaped not by the billion-dollar deals, but by the moments when he had chosen kindness over cruelty, humility over arrogance, character over convenience. That evening, he received an email from a young programmer at Chen Technologies, someone he'd never met, saying that she had heard the story, and it had reminded her why she was proud to work there, why she believed technology could be a force for good. And she signed it, "Thank you for showing us that success and decency aren't opposites." And Daniel sat at his simple desk in his simple apartment, and he thought about Elizabeth, and he thought about Tom, and he thought about Sarah, and even about Marcus, and he understood that the most important deal he had ever negotiated wasn't worth $800 million, but was worth something far more valuable. It was the deal he made with himself every morning to honor the promise he made to the woman he loved, to measure his life not by what he accumulated but by who he became, and to remember that real power isn't the ability to humiliate others, but the strength to lift them up, the wisdom to see clearly, and the courage to choose grace, even when revenge would be easier, because in the end, we are not defined by how we treat people who can do something for us, but by how we treat people who can do nothing for us, and that is the only wealth that matters, the only success that lasts, the only legacy worth leaving behind.